Good morning and welcome to our prayer promise for this week. And this week we're going to consider the word generations. Now, when we think of the word generations, we can pretty much put it into two categories. All right, the first category is the older generation, as you can see on the screen in front of me. And the second category is the younger generation. And when you consider the older and the younger, they are the generations in which we see in our modern time. And when we consider the older generation, we sometimes think that they are stuck in their ways. You can't persuade them otherwise. They've got their thoughts and that's what they're sticking to. And when we think about the younger generation, when we consider them, they are pretty much changing with the times. So the older generation are stuck in their ways, and the younger generation, they are changing with the times. You could say that the older generation is old-fashioned. That's what we perceive them as. Why? Because they're stuck in their ways and they don't want to change. They're happy doing that. And the younger generation is always looking for that new way, and they're always looking for that paradigm shift in their life, and therefore they're constantly seeking ways to change. Well, the older generation, as you can imagine, is always ready to give advice to the younger generation. And we have three examples of that in our next slide. And what we have here is Eunice. Now, Eunice is 81 years of age, and she's getting up there in her age now, and she's got some advice for the younger generation. Her advice is don't swear and respect your mother and your father. Your parents, she says, respect them. And don't use bad language. And look, if you really respect your mother and your father, you're probably not going to use bad language. So that's a very good advice that Eunice gives to the younger generation. The second example that we're going to show you is Millie. Now, Millie is 92 years of age, and Millie also has some advice for the younger generation. And her advice is, don't smoke. Now, I don't know if you can actually see Millie's face, but Millie actually has some air tubes going into her nose, and that is helping her breathe. Obviously, she needs some assistance in doing that. Maybe she was a smoker. So her advice to the younger generation is don't smoke. So maybe that's a good advice that she can give to the younger generation, because she doesn't want the younger generation to end up the way that she is at the moment. The third example that we have is Cliff. Now, Cliff is 89 years of age, and I look at Cliff and I think he's been a hard worker all of his life. And his advice to the younger generation is work hard and behave. So work hard at whatever you do in your life, whether it's your job or whether it's your family or whatever you want to do, work hard at it and do it in a good way. That's why he says behave at the end there. And the Bible tells us a little bit about the older and the younger generation and the examples that we've just seen here. So we're going to turn to the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 16. Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 16. And we're going to use this as our theme verse. And in this verse we see God giving us promises. So you found your place, Jeremiah 6 verse 16. All right, let's start to read this verse. It says there, thus saith the Lord. So what we're about to read, God is telling us And because he's telling us it, we should listen. It's very important. And he says here, stand ye in the ways and see and ask for the old paths. So those three examples that were just given by Eunice, Millie and Cliff, those three examples, you can look to them and you can say, oh, well, I don't really want to listen to that. You know, you may be a smoker and you might think, oh, I don't need to quit because I'm fine, I'm still healthy. Well, Millie isn't, and she's trying to give you some advice. And God is saying, just stand and look and ask for the old paths. And he says, why do he say this? Where is the good way? See, I believe that Millie in her life, growing older, has realised that the way that she's lived her life is probably not the good way. Why? Because she understands that what she's done in her life now has had an effect on her health. So to her, it's not good anymore. And God is saying, look to the good ways. And then he says, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls. So if we look to the old paths, the old ways, and we do them, we'll have a twofold promise. First, you will find the good way. All right, God's ways. This is what it's talking about. God's ways are good ways. The second thing that we'll find is rest. Rest. Now, obviously, Cliff, he says, work hard and behave. Well, I think Cliff, after a long working career in his life, when he retired, he just wanted to have some rest. And if we look to God, that's what we can have. We can have rest from all of the things that we've done in our life, but only God can give us this rest. Now, if we think about the older and the younger generation, we can see that generations have changed. There's been a change in the way that the older and the younger generation are. There's sort of like a gap in between that. And the Bible tells us a little bit about this generation gap, I guess you can describe it, and that's what we sort of describe it as in modern times. This generation gap, and God prophesied that this generation gap will happen and that the younger generation will be different to the older generation. How do we know this? Turn to 2 Timothy now. 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3. And what we're going to do is we're going to read from verse 1 through to verse 4 and also verse 7. So 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through to 4 and verse 7. All right, have you found your place? All right, let's read. In verse 1 it says, "This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come." This is a prophecy that God gives us about the last days, and I don't know about you, but the Bible tells a lot about the last days, and from what we're about to read, we can understand that we are actually living in the last days. So let's read on. It says, "For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God." Now verse 7, "ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth." So there's lots of things in there that tell us what the new generation is like. For an example, It says in verse 2, "For men shall be lovers of their own selves." Their own selves. You know, you can look at people. I was in Brisbane City the other day, and there was a man who was walking across the road there, and I can tell you, when you just looked at him, you can tell that he was a lover of himself. Just the way that he acted and the way that he conducted himself in front of everyone else, he was a lover of himself. And we're seeing that a lot in society today, that people actually have more of a high thought of themselves than anyone else. We also see that they are covetous. You know, they look at someone else's possessions and they want more, and they want more. And by the time they get more, they're still not happy with that. They just want to get more and more, and they're doing that because they see other people's possessions and they covet it and they just want it. How about boasters? Lots of people are boastful in today's society, especially in the younger generation. They're trying to build themselves up to be something that they're not. How about proud? You know, pride is something that is very strong in society today because that's what they're taught. They're taught to be, think of yourself higher than what you should. And we see that a lot. Blasphemers. You know, people swear a lot in society. We saw that with Eunice. Eunice said, "Don't swear and respect your mother and your father." You know, she probably grew up in a day and age where swearing wasn't around. It wasn't really as bad as what it is today, but the younger generation is full of blasphemers. How about disobedient to parents? You know, Eunice says, "Respect your mother and your father." Well, a lot of people don't respect their mother and their father today. Unthankful. There's a lot of people now that aren't thankful for things that you do for them. How about unholy? You know, they're not looking to God and they don't want to follow God in any shape or form. You can see that they're unholy. How about without natural affection? You know, people are not caring about other people the way that they used to. You know, you used to go out in the street and you used to be able to talk to people, you know, say g'day or say hello to them, and they used to have a good conversation with you, but that's all gone out of the wayside now because people don't have a care about anyone else. How about truce breakers? You know, you find on the news in different countries especially, they signed a truce between each other if there's a war, and before you know it too long, that truce is broken. It's by the wayside. How about false accusers? You know, there's a lot of people accusing other people falsely of whatever they're trying to accuse them of. And you don't know what to believe and what not to believe anymore because of these false accusers. How about incontinent? That word incontinent there means without self-control. You know, they can't control themselves. They have to do certain things, and no matter what the situation is, you see that their demeanour and the way that they conduct themselves and their anger always comes out, and they don't try to have a bit of self-control. How about fierce? They're very angry, and you know, anger in society now is really getting bad and really getting higher. How about despisers of those that are good? You know, we see these three examples of these three different people. And I wondered how many people would actually take on their advice. How many people would actually look to that and say, you know what, they're trying to teach me the good way in life and actually apply it to their life? Well, probably not many, because we're seeing that a lot of people are despising those that are good in society. Traitors. There's a lot of people doing the wrong thing towards others. Heady and high-minded. They're thinking higher of themselves than what they should. Lovers of pleasures. Pleasure nowadays is something that's getting really strong, and I have to satisfy self, and I have to have all these pleasurable things in my life. But this is the main thing. You look at the younger generation, and it's all about learning now. You must go to university, you must go to TAFE, you must get an apprenticeship or something like that, and we're finding that we're all trying to learn and learn and learn, but the Bible here says that we're ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. What is this talking about? Well, it's talking about God's word, the truth. But in society, knowledge and technology and all that sort of stuff, they're trying to know more and more and more, but they can't find the truth, so therefore they're still learning. In Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 1, it says, "So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun." The oppressions are all these things that we just read, which are bad. All those things that we just looked at, you can't look at them and say, oh, they're really great. I really want to focus my life around these things. Well, I look at those things and I think, no, I don't want to focus my life around those, because that's not how God expects me to focus my life. And God says they're oppressions. Why? He goes on to say, "And behold the tears of such as were oppressed." So just think about the older generation for a second. They're trying to tell the younger generation how they should live a better life, but the younger generation turns around and says, no, we don't want to do that. So the older generation, you could say, are very sad the way that the younger generation are living. It goes on in Ecclesiastes 4 verse 1, and it says, "And they had no comforter." There's no one to comfort the older generation, because the younger generation don't want to comfort them. So therefore there was no one. And also says, "And on the side of their oppressors there was power." There was a lot of power there, but they had no comforter. Why? Because they didn't include God in their life. The younger generation seems to be getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and the older generation seems to be getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and there's no comforter around to help them comfort their lives. But God says in Jeremiah 6 verse 16, "Stand ye in the ways and see." Just see. Ask for the old paths. And when you ask for the old paths, God says, where is the good way? We always think about the good old days, and we think about how, our grandfathers or our great-grandfathers did things, and we think, oh, that was just such more of a simple life. Well, it was. They were good days. They were good ways. And it says, "And walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls." You see, you'll get comfort. If you walk in God's ways, the old paths, you'll find the good way, and you'll find rest for your souls. You'll find comfort. But this is the key. It ends by saying, "But they said," let's say the younger generation, "but they said, we will not walk therein." So now the older generation is saddened by that. They said, "No, we're not going to walk in the ways that you've tried to give us advice in. No way, we're not doing it. We've got our own ways to walk in, and that's the ways that we're going to stick to. We're going to be covetous. We're going to be boasters and proud and blasphemers and disobedient, and the list went on there. That's the way we're going to live our life. But I want you to think about yourself this morning. Which ways are you walking in? Are you walking in the old ways? Or are you walking in the new ways, which are just causing the older generation grief? Are you walking in the new ways, which is a worldly way, or are you walking in the old ways, which is a godly way? You know, we can only answer these questions for ourselves. If you walk in the old ways, God is promising you a good way, and He is promising you a restful way. Ask yourself, do I want to walk in a good way? And do I want rest? Do I want comfort when I'm walking in those good ways? Well, for me, I do. I want to have comfort and I want to be in a good way. Because if you look at the world today, there's no good way. There's no rest, there's no comfort there. But with God, there is. So today, God's giving us a twofold promise. A good way and a restful way. May the Lord bless you today.